Now we're at the part of the segment where we're going to hear from Bob Myers, the former president of the Golden State Warriors, especially when they made their title runs in the 2010s. And he gives us great insight on how they ignored the analytics, especially when it came to Klay Thompson's value. The numbers don't always tell the whole truth. You guys check it out, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
Jaylen Brown, the Jaylen Brown trade. I mean, you're here.
Yeah, let's talk about
that's an enormous. It's at first hearing it's like Finals MVP. We saw him carry a team. I think one of the reasons the analytics don't like him as much as the eye test, this giant gap between how he's perceived through the eye test, and by the way, through the results, and what the advanced analytics are saying.
So I'll ask you, you both can answer, this is easy. Of those Warrior teams, guess who rated not great analytically his whole career, or all the time?
Steph?
No, he's good.
Oh, Draymond.
You said guess.
Nope.
Well, Draymond, I know the analytics don't love him.
No. He's good. And defensively, it's like
Klay?
off the charts. Klay. Think about that. Klay never rated well analytically. And tell me what kind of player Klay Thompson is.
Yeah.
Hall of Fame. We don't win without Klay Thompson. So
No, of course.
where you look, the thing about analytics is kind of like people go all the way too far one way, or all the way, I don't listen to analytics, or all that matters is analytics. It's neither. If you and I are having a conversation, this is where you have to look at some things and go, yeah, that says that. But by the way, I don't know how you get Finals MVP if you're not a good basketball. I don't even know.
I don't think anyone's
possible.
saying he's not
No,
good.
no, I understand. Very good.
Yeah.
Like very good. And by the way, forget about, you know what you should look at Jaylen Brown and evaluate is winning.
Yeah, of course.
That's the analytics. Winning.
Yeah.
His teams won.
Yeah, 100%.
The Celtics right now they've got one championship in the last, but you know how many times they've been to the Eastern Conference Finals?
But
they won his rookie season.
But I will say this about Jaylen Brown, and you're right. Like look, they came up short this year, but the fact that they got as far as they did, they outkicked their coverage in that sense.
Sure.
But just speculating about why Klay might have been underrated by analytics is what I said earlier about Jaylen Brown. If you were playing the Warriors before KD got there, how do you really beat them? It's almost impossible.
Right.
One of the things you could do is make Klay put the ball on the floor and make decisions with it. Not because he can't do it, but because he's not as good at that as, say, Steph Curry.
Sure.
That's not why he's there.
Right.
And sometimes, you know how they say like a little knowledge is dangerous? Sometimes a more well-rounded skill set or the guy's ability to do multiple things can be used against them when they're pressed into doing that thing. And because they can do it, they do it a little too much.
And this is the thing that
although Klay never dribbled the ball.
When you build these teams, when you build these teams, the art of it is, how do I put together a group of five? It's people. There's five guys playing basketball. It's not golf. It's not.
I always said this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the genius or the art of it, or not the analytical component of it, is how do I put five guys on the floor where I can? There's very few players that you don't have to cover up some weakness, where you don't look at like, well, Max isn't great at this, so I got to help him in this spot. You know, there's very few guys you go, he's great at everything. That's
LeBron in his prime.
But like he can guard multiple positions, he can pass, rebound, steal, everything. But most guys aren't like that. So then you go, okay, Klay Thompson, let's put him on Kyrie Irving or James Harden. Just you shut him down. If we don't have that guy, we do not win those series. Now the analytics doesn't value that as much, but winning, like we don't win without him. So what you're saying is,
but no, the analytics do account for that. Box plus minus.
But not like they look at a lot of off ball defense, block steals, things like that. They don't value enough of, I'm guarding Max and I'm just going to shut you down. They don't value
and how that might have an effect on what's happening elsewhere.
Because if you're looking if you were asking somebody like, what's wrong with the analytics? They would say, well, he doesn't do this, or that, and you'd be like, okay, but he does all these other things. Sometimes analytics overvalue certain parts.
And let's keep it a buck. A lot of the people that are in control of some of these stats or just add in all these variables, they don't even consider certain things because they never fucking played. But again, the quiet part that Bob Myers is not saying out loud, during his time being the president of the Golden State Warriors, he did have the basketball mind of the late, great Jerry West as a consultant. Golden State was ready to trade Klay at a point, and Jerry West stepped in and stopped them from making that move.
I think they've gotten pretty. You would know more than I, but better than I would. But I think in basketball, a lot of the evaluation that is not precise is that people see how deep a bag someone has, right?
Yeah.
And they assume that makes them the better player.
Right.
But it's the wisdom in terms of how you deploy, what tools you reach for and when. And the perfect example to me is Jaylen Brunson,
Right.
where like if you looked at Kyrie Irving and Jaylen Brunson, Kyrie should be a better basketball player than Jaylen Brunson. He should be. He is not. Jaylen Brunson is better than Kyrie Irving because the way he deploys his whatever he has to do is more conducive to winning. And I say that as a big Kyrie Irving fan, by the way. But we've seen Kyrie in situations where it didn't lead to winning.
Well, with Kyrie's definitely more skilled. But when it comes to the translation of him leading a team deep into the playoffs, into a possible finals run, Brunson would be better suited because of his play style and the way it opens things up for his teammates. But it is what it is. As you guys can see, there is a gap because of the way the players have allowed these owners to finesse them when it comes to their salaries being hard capped. They definitely left the door open for them to be evaluated outside of what they're producing on the court. If they have the leverage to get a little slight salary bump than they normally would, now that's going to be accounted against them because of the second apron rules. This fiasco is definitely multi-layered, and it's not going to just end with Jaylen Brown. Check out Brian Windhorst right here as he perfectly explains why some of the analytical crowd is even saying Pritchard and Derek White is more valuable.
But if I had to boil it down to one paragraph, and I mean, there's a lot of nuance required here, and I realize that this is not a time for nuance because people are in their feelings about this. If I could boil it down to one paragraph, it's this. I don't believe that the league doesn't think Jaylen Brown is a very good player. Did you hear what I just said? I don't believe that the league does not believe Jaylen Brown is a very good player. What I think is the league believes he's not a $57 million player. And that is asking for a lot of comprehension because there are people who not only are defending Jaylen Brown, but defending the concept of the eye test versus analytics. Yes, there are all kinds of analytics, but in the era where there's essentially a hard salary cap, which is essentially what we have with the second apron, okay? There's a lot more stress on you performing to your level of a player. And so this is the thing. Peyton Pritchard makes $7 million. Nobody in their right mind would ever say that Peyton Pritchard is a better basketball player than Jaylen Brown. In an era where the aprons mean everything and dollars are defined and efficiency of dollars defines your team, Peyton Pritchard is viewed as more efficient with his contract than Jaylen Brown is.
Now, right there, we also have to calculate if Jaylen Brown is not on the floor, drawing up a bunch of attention, could Pritchard even be effective at that $7 million number if he's seeing more of a double team or just more attention every time he tries to score? That's the part the analytical crowd is not looking at. What happens when it's just him and Tatum out there on the floor and there's no one else on the wings that's just drawing up a bunch of attention, especially when he drives to the hoop like Jaylen Brown?
I mean, anybody on the planet thinks that Jaylen Brown is not a significantly better player than Peyton Pritchard, okay? But when you look at one guy makes $7 million and produces this, and it results in this on the scoreboard, and one guy makes $57 million and produces this, and it results in this on the scoreboard, there's a differential there. And so that's what people are talking about when they're talking about quote unquote value. All right. And so this is where we get into big time trouble. The language that the decision makers in the league are talking about and the people who are deciding whether to keep Jaylen Brown or trade Jaylen Brown or trade for Jaylen Brown or not trade for Jaylen Brown, they are looking at this term of value.
Now, that exact situation right there, I would say almost serves as another false boost to the value of what the analytical crowd is saying nowadays, because the owners are so cautious of the second apron, especially with the crop of new owners using private equity money, that they don't want to have to answer to them saying that, hey, we have to dip into the luxury tax, spend an additional $150 million a season as we're trying to compete. So the fact that the league now is allowing owners who don't necessarily have the money to buy these teams using private equity, the owners are now going to rely on the voices even more of that very same analytical crowd. Again, it almost serves as another false elevation of just credibility. Yes, they're right when you calculate the dollar amount so you won't hit the second apron. But at the same time, when you look at the impact on the court, it's not explaining that part. What happens when Pritchard and also Derek White, the other guy that they're saying is more valuable than Jaylen Brown, what happens when they're seeing more attention in the wings? Will it actually justify their contract? That right there is a major blind spot, and it's going to be hard for them to justify it to the NBA audience without it looking like the owner's just trying to save money, because that's really what it is.
What people are talking about when they're talking about quote unquote value. All right. And so this is where we get into big time trouble. The language that the decision makers in the league are talking about, and the people who are deciding whether to keep Jaylen Brown or trade Jaylen Brown or trade for Jaylen Brown or not trade for Jaylen Brown, they are looking at this term of value. And people who love basketball and want to watch it and don't want to get into the spreadsheets, they see Jaylen Brown and say, my God, what a valuable player. Not even valuable, most valuable player of the finals.
Right.
And we are having two different conversations using the same language. And so basically what this is a challenge is, can we understand that it's two different conversations? Right now, we cannot. And I don't know if we're going to get there, but that's where we are at. And that is where the stress is. And that is what is going to make, frankly, the storyline of Jaylen Brown next year be one of the most compelling you could possibly imagine in the league.
No question. And look, I had a primary decision maker for another team in the league say, if you make $60 million, this is what you're worth in a trade. If he made 40, every single team in the league would have been lining up for Jaylen, even with, all the other issues.
And that right there is another problem that the NBA players, especially their union, is going to have to look at. These front offices are viewing any co-star or just any player that gets paid a high salary as a net negative off rip. They're not even looking at his talent. The fact that you pay a co-star a certain price, even if he deserves it, it's a negative in the trade market because you would have to add a pick or two in order to get rid of him. So off rip, most co-stars in the league are looked at as a net negative. Matter of fact, a few players that fall into this category is Trae Young, Anthony Davis, Ja Morant, even a guy like Jamal Murray. He's valuable on the Nuggets, but other teams are going to look at him as a net negative if you're paying a co-star almost $50 million a year. You would have to add on draft picks in order to get rid of him. Jalen Duren right now out in Detroit, he's kind of going through the same thing. They're not necessarily evaluating him on his output, but it more has to do with, hey, if this doesn't work out, he's a net negative in the trade market. We would have to add picks in order to get rid of him. This exact scenario right here can only be fixed with the players' union, because they're going to have to get rid of these apron rules so players can go back to just being evaluated off their talent and not how much money they cost. We're in a very different NBA now, and a lot of these analytical guys behind the scenes, they're looking at the rest of the stars in the league and they're placing them into tiers according to how much they get paid. Then they look at their talent second.
And look, obviously it reached a point where, for whatever reasons, the Boston Celtics believed they needed to move on from Jaylen Brown. And whether that is, I don't even want to get into the blame game on that. But they reached that point where they believed they needed to move on from Jaylen Brown. I'm pretty sure they reached that point before they put him in an offer for Giannis. And then after that, they just had to find the best deal. I think that there's plenty of room to criticize the approach that the Celtics took in terms of they went out swinging for sky-high value. They went out trying to trade Jaylen Brown at the value of the sixth most valuable player in the league, which is what he was in the MVP voting, when the league does not perceive him to be, the league in terms of the people who are making decisions on trade, that the league does not perceive him to be the sixth most valuable person in the league, the sixth most valuable player, because in part of his contract. And then this is such a hot button issue, but the advanced analytics are not favorable to Jaylen Brown. I had another GM basically say, look,
here we go.
Look,
be careful. I'm saying be careful what you're about to say. That's all I'm going to say.
Listen, it's our job to explain things, whether we're co-signing, not co-signing, whatever. When there's something like this that confuses the hell out of basically the media, all the fans. You saw this trade, and let's be honest, the initial reaction was, what the bleep? And, this other GM says, this is a classic case of the credit goes to the guy who scores, but they're not driving team success. There's guys like this all over the league. The difference is he's not at 40 million and like a Brandon Ingram, he's at 60 million. And then look, he's rounding up, and then
he's going to be at 60 soon.
Right. And then it gets into the CBA and the cap rules and the apron. And he says, it's really hard to tie up that much money in your salary cap for one player unless they're truly generational. And he's not even close to that. I also said the league is getting smarter now. And here's the thing. The dumb teams are the cheap teams. So the Celtics weren't even in a position to try to capitalize on a quote unquote dumb team because they're not bringing in a guy who has 180 something million over the next 3 years left on his deal and who wants an extension off of those numbers.
Once again, you're seeing right there that Jaylen Brown is not necessarily being judged off his talent. It's the fact that his talent is attached to $60 million opposed to their calculations, which should have been around 40. And I'm not going to lie, it's the NBA players' fault that they're in this situation right now. There should have never been an agreement to have these second apron and first apron rules. Now, Jaylen Brown had responded on X, and he spoke a lot of truth. Quote, nobody has won more combined regular season and playoff games since I entered the league 10 years ago. Analytics have/are ruining the game. We are playing AI hoops. Again, Jaylen Brown is coming off a season where he won 56 games while his team made moves in the offseason and at the end of the regular season to continue to tank this team. LeBron James himself has only won over 55 games only 6 times in his career, just to put that into perspective. But just like how Brian Windhorst has stated, it's almost like 2 different languages are being spoken because the analytical crowd within these NBA front offices are now there to actually save these organizations money so the owners don't have to go to private equity and have to answer of why they're paying a $150 million tax bill going from season to season.